Hello guys, and what is up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Becca and this is Murder Monday. Granted, it is being released on a Tuesday, but we are not going to play semantics. This is still Murder Monday. It's just a little late. Everyone's a little late sometimes, that's all I gotta say. I'm really excited for this story. I think this is going to be probably one of the most bizarre stories you've ever heard. Honest to God, this is probably the closest to that I've ever seen to a whole ass Criminal Minds episode. There's a bank robbery, there's a bomb, there's a body in a freezer, there's a conspiracy to commit murder, there's a hitman, there's prostitutes, there's everything that you could possibly imagine in one story. And it's all true. It all actually happened. And I'm going to tell you about it right now. August 28th, 2003, a 46-year-old pizza delivery man walks into a bank in Erie, Pennsylvania. I know that sounds like the beginning of a joke, but it's not. Stay with me. Also, you might want to get a pen and paper. There are some twists and turns in this, and there's a lot of names, and you might want to take notes. So Brian Wells walks into this bank, and he's looking a little odd, to say the least. His shirt is up like this. He looks a little crazy. He's got a weird looking cane in his hand, and he takes a beeline straight for the bank teller. He slides a note across the table and he says, "Gather everyone up in the bank that has access codes to the vault. Put $250 in the bag. You have 15 minutes. Then he lifts up his shirt and he reveals that the weird shape under his shirt is actually a big ass bomb that had been strapped to his neck. The bank teller goes, "I don't know what to tell you. All the people that we need to get into the bank vault aren't here. There's no way for us to get in there. This isn't something that we just like keep laying around. I don't have $250,000. I have $8,000, actually $8,700 that I can give you." And Brian goes, "Oh, fine, whatever." And she puts it in a bag and he grabs a Dum Dum lollipop, one of the free candies that the banks offer. He grabs a Dum Dum lollipop off the counter, takes the wrapper off, pops it in his mouth, and calmly exits the bank, leaving everyone a little perplexed as to what the hell just happened. He gets in his car and he drives away. About 15 minutes later, he is spotted standing outside of his car in a McDonald's parking lot, in front of his, I think it's a Geo, and he is pulled over, he's stopped by police. They say, "Get on the ground," and they throw him to the ground, they handcuffed him, and he now sits for the next 25 minutes like this, trying to convince the cops to let him go. He says that 2 armed black men held him at gunpoint, and they put the bomb around his neck, and they ordered him to go rob the bank. And he really needs to get out of here. This thing is going to go off. I'm serious, guys. He's trying to convince them to let him go. And the cops are just like, "Shut the hell up. Tell us what's going on. Stop talking." And while this is all going on, the cops had called the bomb squad. And the news stations all pulled up. This whole shit show, for lack of a better name, is being streamed live across the evening news. Just as strange as Brian Wells grabbing the lollipop and calmly exiting the bank, he's also weirdly concerned that his boss be called, and the police tell his boss that he's not slacking on his duties, that he's actually being held up by police, that he robbed a bank and he's being held up by police. He's weirdly concerned with his boss knowing that. As he's trying to convince these police officers to call his boss, the bomb starts to beep. Like in a movie, starts to beep, 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 beep. Brian is starting to panic. He tries to back up. He's trying to get away from the bomb. No luck. It goes off. And it blows him backwards and leaves a 5-inch gash in his chest. And at 3:18 p.m., Brian Wells passes away from a bomb exploding around his neck. That tends to happen. 3 minutes after Brian Wells dies, the bomb squad shows up. Good timing, guys. Right away, the police dive into investigation mode. They get into his car and they discover a treasure trove of bizarre evidence. For one, there's that cane that we mentioned that he was carrying. It's not actually a cane, it's a handmade shotgun that just looks like a cane. And also the bomb itself is bizarre all on its own. Obviously it's handmade, you can't just go to Walmart and buy a bomb, but this one's a little unique. It is a giant iron box that is connected to what looks like a big ass handcuff around Brian's neck. Inside the big metal box around his neck are 2 6-inch pipe bombs, along with 2 Sunbeam kitchen timers, like the little white ones that you, and then it goes, you know what I mean? There's 2 of those, and then a digital countdown timer that are in there. In addition to that, there's all these wires. There's wires that are connected to the bomb, wires that aren't connected to anything, all of these warnings and stickers trying to make it look really deceiving and really dangerous, and all these threatening messages inside the bomb. However, having said all of that, even if the bomb squad had gotten there earlier, had gotten there 10 minutes sooner, Brian Wells was still going to die. The bomb was designed to go off if it were tampered with. If anyone had tried to remove it, it would have gone off. Brian Wells was destined to die that day. But it gets even weirder. Inside his car, the police find a bunch of handwritten notes from what is assumed to be the hostage takers messaged out, and they are notes to the bomb hostage. They're essentially telling him, you follow the rules, follow us to the letter, don't think, do what we're telling you to do, and you'll live. The caller had these 3 keyholes and a 3-digit combination pin. So he had to follow these instructions that were laid out by the hostage takers supposedly in order to get the bomb off. There were detailed maps, there were threats, there were instructions. It was just this weird, deadly scavenger hunt that Brian Wells was being forced to participate in. It seemed like whoever had kidnapped Brian, strapped this bomb around his neck, and forced him to rob the bank wasn't just interested in the money. It was all about the performance. It was all about the tasks that Brian had to do. Literally, it's like that episode, I can't remember who the actor is, but it's that episode of Criminal Minds, a short guy with the long white hair. He goes to Spencer Reed's talk at the college and is like, I'm the perfect criminal, you'll never catch me. And he's really into like sacred geometry. That episode, that's what this whole thing reminds me of. The first instruction tells him to go to the bank and get $250. Then get back in your car and go to the McDonald's parking lot. At the drive-through 24-hour sign in the flower bed under a rock will be your first instruction on where to go. That was as far as Brian Wells had made it into the instructions. But the police picked up the scavenger hunt from there. Underneath the rock, the police find a 2-page note that basically instructs Wells, and now the police, to go up to Peach Street, which was a wooded area several miles from where they were. There, the police would find a container with some orange tape on it, and in the container would be the next set of instructions. Sure shit, the cops go to the designated location, and there is a container with orange tape with instructions in it. These instructions tell them to go to another location about 2 miles away to a small wooden sign on the side of the road, and a little ways off the road into the woods there would be a glass mason jar with the next set of instructions. The police follow the instructions, they go to this little sign on the side of the road, and there's a glass jar. However, there's no instructions in there. It seems as though the kidnappers had been following the whole crime as it was unfolding, and when they saw that Brian Wells had been picked up by police and inevitably died, they stopped the scavenger hunt and they stopped leaving the clues and bailed. Another odd piece that just adds to this whole Criminal Minds episode theory of mine was Brian Wells was wearing 2 shirts that day. He was wearing his pizza delivery man t-shirt from Mamma Mia's Pizzeria, and on top of that, he was wearing a white shirt that just said guess across the front. And his family and friends said that they'd never seen that shirt before. They didn't believe that it was Brian Wells' t-shirt. So did the kidnappers put the shirt on him as like a guess who I am, guess who did it, guess who we are type of thing? Like taunting police with a t-shirt? Like, that's so scripted, it's crazy. And the questions just built from there. Why kidnap some guy, strap a bomb to his chest, and send him on this crime rampage and this scavenger hunt all throughout Erie in broad daylight? Why Brian Wells? Why was he so calm? Why did the scavenger hunt stop? How do you make a neck bomb? How do you make a cane shotgun? Like, there was just so many questions. And it took the media by storm. Every news station across the globe was reporting on this necklace bomb scavenger hunt thing. And it just kept getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And it continues to get weird for like the next 7 years. It gets weird. The FBI gets involved and they name the hostage taker the collar bomber. Like I said, this investigation goes on for 7 years and it just gets progressively bizarre as time goes on. The farther they get into the investigation, the less answers they have and the more questions they uncover. The whole thing starts that day at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria, where Wells was working at around 1:30 on the day of the robbery. Now, Brian Wells had been a loyal employee to Mamma Mia's Pizzeria for 10 years. In fact, in those 10 years, he only missed one day, and that was when his cat died. And it was at the end of his shift, he was ready to go home, and this order comes in for 2 small pepperoni and sausage pizzas. And he could have just gone home. He could have just left it to the next driver and moved on with his life. But he didn't, because he was a good, loyal employee. He's like, I'll take this one last order and then I'll go home. And he takes this pepperoni and sausage pizza order out for delivery. The delivery location was also a little strange. It was off the beaten path, off a dirt road, off Peach Street, up at some TV transmitting towers. The investigators go to that location where the pizzas were delivered to, or ordered to rather, and there they find Wells's footprints in the dirt and his car tire tracks, but no real evidence is found, and they leave. The next day, after the police go to the TV towers, a news reporter shows up and he wants to get some pictures and he wants to snoop around on his own, but the whole area is cordoned off by police. But over off to the side, there's this giant man, and he's pacing in front of his house, which is located right next to the TV towers. And he goes to this man and he says, hey, can I go in your backyard and try and get close to the TV towers so that I can get some pictures? This guy's name is Bill Rothstein. Here is another name to write down. So we've got Brian Wells and Bill Rothstein at this point. Bill is a 59-year-old handyman, repairman, who had been a lifelong resident of the area, and he lived in this house by himself. He spoke very, very eloquently. He was fluent in French and in Hebrew, and he took pride in his mastery of the English language. He was very articulate and well-spoken. And his backyard extended almost all the way to the TV tower. And for the next 15 minutes, Bill would walk this TV news reporter through his backyard to try and get better pictures, but really, they couldn't see anything, and after those 15 minutes were up, the TV reporter leaves. The TV reporter notes that it was really strange how Bill was acting so calm. It was like he didn't even know that there had been a murder, that there was an investigation essentially going on in his backyard. He just seemed completely unfazed by the whole thing. On September 20th, less than a month after Brian Wells' death, Bill calls 911, and he says that in his garage, there is a body in his freezer. Within hours of making the call, Bill is arrested and taken into custody. He told police that he was in agony for weeks over having that body in his freezer, and it was eating him alive inside. So much so that he actually intended to kill himself. He even wrote a suicide note explaining everything before he called police. And investigators did in fact find a suicide note in his desk. Writing in black marker, Bill says, "To those who care about me," and he goes on to tell the story of what happened. He identifies the body in the freezer as that of Jim Roden. That's another name to remember. So we've got Brian Wells, Bill Rothstein, and Jim Roden. He says, I didn't have anything to do with his murder. I didn't have anything to do with his death. I didn't plan it. I wasn't involved at all. My ex-girlfriend called me out of nowhere, said that she had gotten in a dispute with her boyfriend over money. She then shoots this man with a shotgun, with a 12-gauge shotgun, and she needs help getting rid of the body, cleaning up the crime scene, disposing of everything, and Bill agrees. For 5 weeks, Bill painstakingly melts down the murder weapon, disposes of it in various locations across Erie, Pennsylvania. When it came time to the plan of essentially grinding up the body, he just couldn't do it. He couldn't stomach the idea of grinding up this man's body. But he was also afraid of what Marjorie, his ex-girlfriend, Marjorie Deli Armstrong, I'm gonna call her Marjorie from here on out, which is another name to remember. So now we've got Brian Wells, Bill Rothstein, John Roden, and now Marjorie Deli Armstrong. But he was afraid of what Marjorie was going to do, so he called the cops. He also put in his note, weirdly enough, that this murder had absolutely nothing to do with Brian Wells' death. That's a weird thing to proclaim. No one was even thinking about that. Bill, why did you bring that up? On September 21st, the day after Bill calls police and essentially rats on Marjorie, Marjorie is arrested and also taken into custody. 16 months later, in June of 2005, Marjorie is sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, she is mentally ill at the time, and so the whole thing takes longer than it needs to. But by then, By the time she actually goes to jail, Bill Rothstein dies of lymphoma in 2004. So the FBI investigating the collar bomber aren't interested in Marjorie or Bill or the murder or the body in the freezer. They think that that's a local crime. They don't think it has anything to do with what they're investigating, and they don't look into this at all at the time. But as the investigation unfolds, it would appear that Bill's suicide note was a lie. Marjorie said that wrote in her boyfriend's murder had everything to do with Brian Wells' death. Marjorie says, if you can arrange for me to go to a minimum security prison in Cambridge Springs, I will tell you everything. And they make the arrangements. Before she was even arrested, Marjorie was notorious for having a string of dead boyfriends and husbands lying in her tracks. In 1984, at the age of 35, she is arrested and inevitably acquitted for shooting her then boyfriend 6 times, which she said was in self-defense. Her boyfriend's name is Robert Thomas, by the way. Not super important, so just keep it as like a side note. 4 years later, Archie Armstrong, her husband, dies of a brain hemorrhage. What's weird about this is he was admitted to the hospital with a giant head wound and then dies of a brain hemorrhage, which are obviously related, but the police never investigate. It's marked as an accident. No one ever looks into it. Bada bing, bada boom, she gets away with it. A little background on Marjorie. Back in high school, everyone, friends, family, teachers, everyone said that she was ridiculously smart, brilliant even. She was an encyclopedia of law and literature and history, and she was just so smart. But they say that there's a fine line between brilliance and insanity. She walked that line like a razor's edge. And as she aged, she started to tip more into the crazy side and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, some things to note about bipolar disorder. Bipolar is kind of marked by its extreme highs and extreme lows. And what we're more concerned about is the extreme highs with Marjorie. I'm going to give you a little background on what those symptoms or what the mania side of bipolar disorder looks like. So you have heightened mood and exaggerated optimism and self-confidence. You have an excessive irritability and aggressive behavior, decreased need for sleep without experiencing fatigue, grandiose thoughts, inflated sense of self-importance, racing speech, racing thoughts, racing or flight of ideas, impulsive, poor judgment, easily distracted, reckless behavior, and in the most severe case, delusions and hallucinations. Marjorie experienced all of these. She was aggressive, she was violent, she was narcissistic, she was paranoid, she talked really fast, and she thought that she was absolutely smarter and more intelligent than everybody around her. And she wanted people to know that. To give you an idea of just how flighty she was and how all over the place she was, when investigators investigated her home, which was like a hoarder's house of trash, they found, I kid you not, they found 400 pounds of butter and 700 pounds of cheese rotting in a trash can in her backyard. What do you need that much cheese and butter for, sweetheart? What were you going to make? Psychiatrists deemed her unfit for trial 7 times before a judge finally was like, no, she's sitting trial. She's gonna sit through trial. We're gonna try her for this. And she was tried for the Thomas case. So that was the ex-boyfriend that she shot and was acquitted on. They retried her for that. She seemed exactly the type to pull off a bank heist and bomb collar and a scavenger hunt. She seemed exactly the type. Murderous, violent, aggressive, angry, eccentric, intent on demonstrating her intellectual skills and making sure that everyone knew how smart she was. Police also thought that if they could get her into custody, she would be so obsessed with herself and not thinking about the bigger picture that she would spill her guts if they got her talking. And they were right. Right off the bat, she insists that she wasn't involved in the plot in any way, but she knew everything about it. That she had actually supplied the kitchen timers that were used in the bombs. Those Sunbeam kitchen timers, she had supplied those. And that she was within a mile of the bank when the robbery occurred. She also said that Brian Wells, the pizza delivery guy, the guy that died, wasn't actually a victim. He was a willing participant. and he had been in on the plan since the very beginning. She also said that Bill, the big giant guy that lived by the TV towers, was the mastermind behind the entire plot. But at the same time as she was pointing the finger at Bill saying that he was the mastermind, she was implicating herself in the murder. Even before she started to spill her guts and she started to basically rat herself out, the FBI was already kind of suspecting that she was really involved in the whole situation. Because over the previous weeks, investigators had met with 4 separate informants, one of which took meticulous notes on their conversations, where Marjorie just sort of bragged about being involved and bragged about how smart she was and how the police weren't going to catch her, and she kind of ratted on herself. She couldn't keep her mouth shut. The informant that took notes said that Roden, the guy that was in the freezer, was also involved in the plot, and that Marjorie was afraid he was going to go police, so she killed him. The informant also said that Marjorie was the one that measured Wells's neck for the bomb. She was very involved in the whole thing. In late 2005, a few months after Marjorie had spilled her guts to the police, they got another major break in the case. A witness had come forward, an ex-TV repairman turned crack dealer, Kenneth Barnes, who was also involved. I told you, it's just the twists and turns are ridiculous. You're going to get whiplash if you try and keep up too fast. Barnes was an old fishing buddy of Marjorie's. And he spoke a little too freely about the situation too, and his brother-in-law turned him into police, but he was already in jail on some drug-related crimes. Threatened with even more jail time, Barnes agreed to a deal. I'll tell you everything in return for a light sentence. Police agreed. Barnes says that Marjorie and not Bill was actually the mastermind behind the whole thing, and her reasonings for it were bananas. Marjorie's dad had money, had money, and she was set to inherit that money when he died. And she was mad because her dad was spending all of the money that she was supposed to inherit. So she wanted to hire Barnes as a hitman to kill her dad, but she needed money to pay him to be a hitman. So they concocted this intricate, elaborate plan to rob a bank with a collar bomb and enlisted Brian Wells to do that. Barnes insisted that while he kind of sort of knew what was going on, he was on the outskirts of the plan. He was just the hitman that was like, I need this money, like, how are you going to do it? And she's like, I'm going to do it this way. And so he knew a little bit about it, but not the intricate details of the plan. Even with all of the holes in his story, all of the missing pieces of information, everything he was saying was lining up with what investigators already knew about the situation. And in February of 2006, Marjorie meets again with the FBI, but this time with her lawyer. When the agents told Marjorie that they had enough evidence to bring an indictment against her, Marjorie lost her fucking mind. She started pounding on the tables and screaming and cussing and yelling at the cops and yelling at her attorney, and this is bullshit. She lost her mind. But incredibly, she still didn't shut up. She was just told they have enough evidence against her to bring an indictment of murder and probably conspiracy and a whole bunch of other shit against her, and she still didn't shut up. She agreed to take police on a little field trip around Erie to show them where she was when the bank robbery took place. She showed them where she was when Brian Wells died and a bunch of other spots that were involved in the crime, and then says, I'm not saying anything else unless I get immunity. Honey, you already said everything. What else could you say? You need to ask for immunity before you open your mouth. That's the takeaway here. The takeaway is if you're going to commit a crazy crime and you're going to be brought up on charges of murder, don't spill your guts until you have the immunity on the table. Once they have everything, you don't have a bargaining chip. That's all I'm saying. In July 2007, a month shy of the 4-year anniversary of the bank robbery, the FBI and the investigators call up the news stations and tell them that they have major development in the case. Standing before God and all of his creations and 100 TV cameras and all of the news stations and friends and family, all these in front of a whole bunch of people, U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan gets on the stand and says the investigation is over. Marjorie and Barnes are charged with carrying out the whole crime, a plot that Marjorie had put into motion to begin with. There was also some indictments brought against some other people like Bill, but he's dead, so it's not like they can actually bring him to jail, and Wells, which was supposedly a victim, but wasn't really a victim, but he's also dead, so you can't really take him to jail. That's kind of hard to do. But pulling information from hundreds and hundreds of interviews, it is confirmed that Wells was involved in the plot from the beginning. He agreed to rob the bank with the bomb around his neck, but he thought that the bomb was fake. The scavenger hunt, he was told, was a ruse to fool police in case he was caught. He's just following instructions. But over time, Wells went from being a planner and a co-conspirator to an actual victim. The fake bomb turned out to be real, the scavenger hunt turned out to be a real life and death situation, and the whole thing was a race against the clock for Brian Wells to save his life. The whole time, Brian Wells' family is in the crowd, and they are stunned. One of his sisters, Barbara White, screams out at Buchanan, "Liar! None of that's true, you're a liar!" But Wells' relatives weren't the only ones really confused by everything. For those who had been keeping track over the years of this case, the police's announcement was a little bit of a letdown. And honestly, it just sort of brought up more questions than answers. Why would Wells participate in the plot in the first place? Why would he back out? When did he back out? At what point did he realize that he was in danger? With all of Marjorie's issues and her inability to keep her friggin' mouth closed, could she really orchestrate this super intense, detailed plan? Could she build the bomb? If not, who did? Could she build the shotgun cane? If not, who did? Barnes pled guilty in September of 2018 to conspiracy charges and weapons charges in relation to the bomb case. He was sentenced to 45 years behind jail. 45 years behind bars. He's just behind the jail, it's fine. But he agreed to testify against Marjorie in order to get a reduced sentence. The Marjorie case promised to clear everything up, tie up all the loose ends, and make everything a nice, neat little package, but that would have to wait. A federal judge ruled that Marjorie was mentally unfit to stand trial, and when she was finally deemed fit to stand trial, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. And the judge kind of put everything on hold until they could get a proper diagnosis from police. Goodness gracious, from the doctors. In August of 2010, the judge receives the assessment from the doctors, basically saying that Marjorie had between 3 and 7 years to live. In August of 2010, the judge receives the assessment from the doctors, basically saying that Marjorie had between 3 and 7 years left to live. And his trial was rescheduled for October 21st. Something that's really odd to take note was that Marjorie's lawyers had her take the stand, which is a huge risk, especially when you have a client like Marjorie who had already implicated herself in the murder. So you're gonna put her on trial on the stand in front of the judge and jury and the lawyers, and you're gonna ask her questions? She can't keep her mouth shut. Horrible idea. On day 5 of the trial, Kenneth Barnes takes a stand against Marjorie. By this time, prosecutors had already built a very strong case against Marjorie, basically saying that it was a twisty-turny, well thought out, poorly executed plot by a bunch of people who were way too smart for their own goods and kind of smarted themselves into a corner. The prosecutor had trotted out witness after witness after witness who had said that Marjorie bragged about her involvement in the crime. Barnes, the ex-crack dealer turned hitman, was the final witness to take the stand and the prosecution's star witness. And Barnes didn't look great. He looked like the stereotypical crack user, crack dealer. He was gaunt, emaciated, skinny. He was pale, his hair was greasy. He just looked the part. But he sat in the witness box and very matter-of-factly laid out everything that happened to the jury. Marjorie developed this plan. She got a couple of people together who wanted a big payday to get involved in the process. Bill Rothstein was, of course, one of them. Wells was another. And everybody was lured into this plot with the promise of a giant payday. And Brian needed the money. You see, he was in a relationship with a prostitute, but not like a real relationship where she didn't charge him for sex. He would get drugs from Barnes in order to pay her for sexual favors, but he fell into deep debt with some drug dealers and he needed money to pay them off. And it was only the afternoon of the crime, when Brian Wells arrived at the TV towers, that he realized that he had been double-crossed. He tried to run away, they tackled him, held him at gunpoint, and snapped the bomb around his neck. Throughout Barnes's testimony, Marjorie was having a conniption in her frickin' seat. She's screaming liar, she's looking sick, she's just agitated, she's being discredited, and they're basically telling her that she's not as smart as she thinks she is, and she is losing her mind sitting there at the table with her lawyer. On November 1st, 2010, After 11 hours and 30 minutes of deliberation over the course of 2 days, Marjorie is found guilty on all charges. February 28th of 2011, Marjorie is sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years without the possibility of parole. However, on March 4th, 2017, in Austin, Texas, at the prison where she was, scheduled to live out her sentence, she dies from the lung cancer. It doesn't end there, because 7 years after the crime, a former FBI agent, Jim Fisher, who had been following this throughout the entire thing, collecting evidence as much as he could as a civilian. He was a professor, a justice professor at the college, but he had been collecting information, watching news reports, getting as much, publicly accessible evidence as possible. He just thinks that the whole thing doesn't make any damn sense. This is the description of the bomber that the behavioral analysis unit put out from the FBI, and the bomb unit put out from the FBI. It continues to be the opinion of this department that this is much more than a mere bank robbery. The behavior seen in this crime was choreographed by the collar bomber, watching on the sidelines according to a written script in which he attempted to direct others to do what he wanted them to do. Because of the complex nature of the crime, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit believes that there were multiple motives for the offender, and money was not the primary one. In other words, the robbery was almost irrelevant. It was about the chase. It was about the cat and mouse game that the collar bomber had developed. The whole thing was important. The money was almost irrelevant. And none of this sounds like Marjorie. Now, if it was just a failed attempt to rob a bank and it was just a bunch of people who had this intricate plan because they thought they were brilliant and it failed, yeah, that makes sense for Marjorie to do it. But the FBI also added about the potential criminal was that this person would be comfortable around a wide variety of power tools and shot machines. This person is frugal, who saves scraps from materials in order to reuse them in various projects, the type of person who would take pride in building a variety of things. So out of all of this, who does that actually sound like? If you are keeping notes and you're keeping track and you said Bill Rothstein, that's what this FBI investigator thinks also. He was meticulous, he was intelligent, he was prideful, but he had never accomplished anything in his entire life. He was just a handyman, a repairman that lived next to some TV towers that probably gave him the lymphoma to begin with, and he just didn't feel like he had left his mark on this world, and he devised a plan to do just that. Because if he hadn't called 911 to tell them about the body in his fridge and implicated Marjorie in that murder, no one would ever know about them. No one would ever know that they even existed. He was the catalyst for this investigation to even get off the ground. He also gave the impression that he wasn't a man that had anything to hide. He let the investigator or the reporter on his property. He called the police. He voluntarily opened up to police about the whole situation. He denied knowing anything about the collar bomb. Even on his deathbed, he was questioned about it, and he still denied knowing anything about it. So think about it this way. You have this, if it wasn't just for the money and it wasn't a failed attempt to be great by some low-life degenerates who were not as smart as they thought they were, if it were the other thing, if it were Bill, who had never accomplished anything, like I said, who was very smart, very articulate, very prideful, wanted to leave his mark, how would he do that? How could he possibly do that? Maybe, just maybe, he enlisted some local criminals who thought they were hot shit, but he knew that he was smarter than them and control them and could control the narrative. And he devised this plan, this intricate, involved plan to have them turn on themselves and have them think it was their idea. And he won. He was successful because he died a free man. He died without anyone knowing of his true, actual involvement. He died without having anyone really prosecute against him. And, it will go on, live on in infamy as this crazy, bizarre, intricate plan that failed. Was it a botched robbery attempt that just got a little too big for its britches? Or was it an extremely well thought out, well executed plan by a criminal mastermind? The world may never know. And that's what makes it a great Criminal Minds episode. What did I tell you? Crazy, right? But my camera is about to die and I refuse to record this again. So I'm gonna say adios. I will see you next time here on Murder Monday. Behave, be good to each other, and remember that none of us are saints. Love you. Bye.